Okay, so now if board members, I'm going to call on the public comment folks, and then we'll have discussion. Welcome, speaker number 1.
Good afternoon, board. My name is Shane Gregory, and I'm here as the custodian of 43 letters that you've received over the last week or so, and I'm entering the names of the authors into the record just so that the public knows who's weighing in. They come from an international coalition of concerned physicians, scientists, environmentalists, teachers, and parents. I'd like to stress that we are not against the educational wonders that are at our fingertips with new technology. Our concerns are about the wireless delivery of this technology. So, on behalf of Cindy Sage, Dr. Martha Herbert of the Harvard Medical School, Mass General Hospital, Dr. Magda Havas, Trent University, Ontario, Canada, Dr. Ole Johansson, Karolinska Institute, Stockholm, Dr. Joel Moskowitz, School of Public Health, UC Berkeley, Dr. Deborah Davis, the Environmental Health Trust, Dr. Martin Blank, Columbia University Department of Physicians and Surgeons, Elizabeth Kelly, Electromagnetic Safety Alliance, Mary Callahan, Wireless Education Action, Ellen Marks, California Brain Tumor Association, Susan Brinkman, Center for Electrosmog Prevention, Deborah M. Rubin, People Against Cell Towers at Schools, Nina Beatty, Dr. Antoinette Stein, Environmental Health Trust, Paul Sunmark, Joshua Hart, Shane Gregory, Ray Peeler, Malini Menon, Kathleen Sunmark, Kikulani Iwata, Gail Nickel, Michelle Kong, Terry Siemens, Sharon Phillips, Linda Ewart, Citizens for Safe Technology Society, Diane Whitmire, Kim Hahn, Elizabeth Barris, Jeff and Stephanie Austin, Barbara Lisanti, Mills College, Gerald Page, Beverly Phillip, Eric Windheim, Victoria Sievers, Allison Pinelli, Sue Chang, MPH, Center for Environmental Health, Mary Beth Brangan, Ecological Options Network, Colleen Gatz, Professor Nareg Spogliarch, Visanya Spogliarch, Zulema Luke, and Astrid Rios, RN. I would like you to please take into consideration the very serious health effects that these distinguished people who've taken a lot of time to write you letters, please take this under consideration. And just to finish up, there's a wonderful website, Escuela Sin Wi-Fi. To quote them, Internet sí, Wi-Fi no. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Kevin Modis, and I stand before you. The first point I wanted to make is when voters voted for bond RYQ, they didn't intend for $500 million to be spent on tablets. They expected it to be spent on infrastructure like buildings and things that are dilapidated, and so people could have better housing for their schoolwork. But I stand here before you, not just myself, but as a representative of many groups, many of whom's directors wrote letters today. But in particular, Citizens for Safe Technology, Environmental Health Trust Organization, California Brain Tumors Association. And I'd like to enter into the official record a 57-page handout I submitted in support of what I'm going to say today. Importantly, there is no proven safe level of microwave radiation exposure to children. And without this, we are experimenting with the health and safety of our children. And we feel this is unacceptable, especially when there is a safe alternative, and that is the wired access to the internet, the wired connection to tablets, that would avoid and put the exposure levels to levels so low that no one would have a safety concern. Especially given that we're spending $500 million on this project, we feel that the money can be spent to ensure its safety for the students that are going to be using it. Our big concern is long-term heavy exposure, because that's the situation we're going to be putting students in. As one principal said, they will be using it for all 6.6 hours of the day, and then we'll be sending them home most likely with the tablet. And given this long-term heavy exposure, there has been a very, very clear association with long-term heavy exposure and cancer. We feel that the Health and Safety Department of the district is using a cost-benefit analysis. We know they're using a cost-benefit analysis to look at this situation, basically making the life and health and safety of a children an expendable cost, and part of the cost being cancer, cardiac problems, immune system disorders, headaches, arrhythmias, and other disorders related to radio frequency microwave exposure that is inherent to all wireless use. We feel that you have sufficient evidence to take precautionary, preventative action to exposing these children to such a health and safety concern. As a government body, you do not need to use the same kind of measure that a legal body would need. That is absolute conclusive proof. All you need is sufficient evidence. And the one thing that is common to all the letters that you see submitted to you by experts from all over the world is that there is sufficient evidence to say it is preferable to go to a wired alternative to prevent microwave radio frequency radiation to our children. We're asking you to exercise your privilege, your right, your mandate to exercise sufficient judgment in providing a precautionary preventative level of exposure. Currently, the district is using a level of radio frequency exposure of 0.1 microwatts per centimeter squared. We believe this is inadequate for several reasons. First, we have good reason to believe in consulting with experts, which we encourage the board to consult with themselves, that this level is unachievable given current modern equipment that does not take into account or want to achieve radio frequency safety. Second, and you will see Cindy Sage of Sage Associates and co-editor of the Bioinitiative Effort report wanted to be here today but was unable to make it. And she submitted a 20-page testimonial, some of which on page 5 of this testimonial, you'll see four articles, Thomas 2008, Henricks 2010, Moeller 2010, another one by Thomas, that shows various biological non-thermal effects from microwave exposure well below the 0.1 level that the district is choosing and calling safe. These are 100 to 1,000 times lower than what the district's level has chosen. Included are concentration problems, headaches, irritation, behavioral problems in children, sleep disturbances, and other chronic effects. Now, this is our concern in the short term. In the long term, our concern is much greater, and that is the prevalence and association with cancer. If you look at page 57 of your handout, page 55, I'm sorry, of your handout, you'll see the work of Dr. Hardell, who basically has found a dose response with exposure of microwave radiation. And that is, he finds that with every 100 hours of exposure, you increase your risk of developing cancer by 4%. He also found that because of the cumulative nature of the exposure, that every year you can add 11% to that risk. So therefore, over a 10-year period, you'll be increasing the children's risk of developing cancer by 800% based on this research. Understand the gravity of this research. This is the research that the Italian Supreme Court used in ruling that cell phones can cause cancer. Part of his group, another part of his revelations in research, is that with children that started to use cell phones before the age 20, they were 5 times as likely to develop cancer than children who used them after that. Now, that's just starting before age 20. Now, what if we start microwave radiation exposure at age 7, say? What is that going to do to the risk of cancer? The implications are very scary, and your obligation to ensure children's safety is very real, and we're asking you to exercise it. The FCC guideline that the district has chosen, they have they have explained is 10,000 times less than the FCC guidelines or requirements. But understand, the FCC guidelines are only guidelines. They are not safety standards. The FCC guidelines only protect children against acute burning. So to say that you're 10,000 times lower than the FCC guidelines means absolutely nothing, because the FCC guidelines are not seen to be protective except for acute burning. Understand also, the FCC guidelines do not cover children. It's part of the special populations that they've explicitly excluded, which includes pregnant women. Now think about our population of students and pregnant teachers and their exposure to microwave radiation and what it's going to mean for their health. Also, the FCC guidelines were designed for a 6-foot man at 220 pounds, not for a small child in elementary school. The FCC guidelines were intended to cover short-term 30-minute exposure, and they allow that to be repeated. But has nothing to do and does not cover long-term exposure like we're going to be exposing our children. Understand that the World Health Organization, when reclassifying electromagnetic fields, including radio frequency radiation that's used in wireless, when they reclassified it as a Class 2B carcinogen, they were looking at a study that found an increased rate of risk for cancer of 40% with 1,640 hours of exposure, which was considered long-term exposure. Our children will have that exposure in 1 year's time. Your approach to let's try it and see what happens, and then if there's a problem, then we can change it or we can stop it, is not appropriate in this case, because after 1 year's time, you've already increased the rate significantly, as documented by the World Health Organization and is included in your packet. The other limitations of the FCC guideline is they do not cover non-thermal effects. They do not cover any subthermal effects, even though thousands of studies have shown non-thermal effects, including studies done by the wireless industry themselves. So to say that your guidelines are that the exposure rate that you're choosing is 10,000 times less than the FCC guidelines is really meaningless. And the sense of safety is just a sense of safety. It does not protect the children and does not protect you from liability if children are to get harmed. The other concern is there is going to be no effort to look at the children's population and see what effects are happening. Even though in Austria, they have developed guidelines for doctors and they recognize electrosensitivity as a real medical condition. And they have specific symptoms that could be looked for and reported back. But there's been no effort to do that. In Sweden, where electrosensitivity, that is people who become very sensitive to electrical fields, has been recognized as an official disability, they estimate that 3% of their population could be considered electrosensitive. If you look at those statistics, and by the way, Sweden was one of the earliest adopters of wireless technology. We should look at what they're doing. We should learn from what they're doing. At 3%, that's 122,000 students that would become electrosensitive. Are we really willing to risk this just for the convenience and the cool factor that wireless provides when we could provide a wired alternative? The URS report that you've been submitted to by the Health and Safety Department has several weaknesses. First, they only look at separate devices being tested, their exposures being tested separately. But as you heard, some of these classrooms have 20 to 50 people in them, and they don't take into account the cumulative exposure. The other thing they do not take into account, when you look at the measurements in the table, ensuring the safety of the students from the tablets, and it's the tablets that are going to be emitting microwave radiation as well as the Wi-Fi. When they look at the exposure of the tablets, they're measuring it from 1 meter away. Now that's completely inappropriate given that the students will not be able to be 1 meter away when they're using their tablet. It has to be very close. And when you eliminate that distance, the risk increases substantially. The reason we're looking at what we know about cell phones is that with all wireless devices, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's a tablet, they emit microwave radiation. And they expose children to microwave radiation effects. To quote And while our health and safety department is very knowledgeable, are they really as knowledgeable as Dr. Martha Herbert from Harvard Medical School and from Mass General Hospital? And she says the following. According to Dr. Herbert, children with existing neurological problems that include cognitive, learning, attention, memory, or behavioral problems should as much as possible be provided with wired, not wireless learning, living, and sleeping environments. Special education classrooms should observe no wireless conditions to reduce avoidable stressors that may impede social, academic, and behavioral progress. Now, this is coming from a pediatric neurologist. All children should reasonably be protected from the physiological stressor of significantly elevated EMF, RMF, wireless in classroom or home environments. School districts that are now considering all wireless learning environments should be strongly cautioned that wired environments are likely to provide better learning and teaching environments and prevent possible adverse health consequences for students and faculty in the long term. Monitoring of the impacts of wireless technology in learning and care environments should be performed with sophisticated measurement and data analysis techniques that are cognizant of the nonlinear impacts of EMF, RMF, and data techniques most appropriate for discerning these impacts. There is sufficient scientific evidence to warrant the selection of wired internet, wired classroom, and wired learning devices rather than making an expensive and potentially health-harming commitment to wireless devices that may be substituted out later. This is from the experts, the real experts in the field, pediatric neurologists. From Dr. David Carpenter, who's the director of public health at Albany University. He says, quote, when speaking of Wi-Fi in the classroom, human studies of comparable RF, and microwave radiation parameters show changes in brain function, including memory loss, retarded learning, performance impairment in children, headaches and neurodegenerative conditions, melatonin suppression and sleep disorders, fatigue, hormonal imbalances, immune dysregulation, such as allergic and inflammatory responses, cardiac and blood pressure problems, genotoxic effects like miscarriages, cancers such as childhood leukemia, childhood and adult brain tumors, and more. This is what I'm asking you to really consider, and this is what I'm asking you to vote for a wired rather than a wireless connection, because of these very, very serious, and I can't think of any more serious implications in terms of the health of the children. We are dealing with a new technology. We are dealing with a technology that is basically unregulated. It only covers burning. The FCC is full of the wireless industry. It is beyond a conflict of interest. The FCC commissioners come from the wireless industry and they return to the wireless industry. The IEEE that's developed the standards is a trade group for the wireless industry. You are being informed regarding the safety and the safety standards for these devices from an organization that is highly, highly conflicted. In the short term, researchers report headaches, concentration difficulties, and behavioral problems at the levels that you are choosing here at the district. And sleep disturbance, concentration problems in adults, as well as headaches. In the long term, we're increasing the children's and the staff risk of cancer by estimated 800% over 10 years and 80% over 1 year. I ask you to at least informally consent your parents about the evidence that is out there regarding the health effects. Provide them a formal consent that we're going to be exposing your children to a Class 2B carcinogen classified by the World Health Organization. Tell them about possible symptoms so that when their child gets sick, they know it's not just something they ate or something genetic, but it's something that's very controllable and preventable, and that is wireless radiofrequency radiation exposure. I think parents deserve at least a warning and education since there's so much ignorance around this topic. The experts in looking at the research use a weighted approach, but understand that on the other side of the weight of studies that are being done by independent sources are the wireless industry funding their own research, paying their own contracts, and focusing information and education on the part of the information they want to provide. Mr. Zimmer, you are fighting very hard in the Pacific Palisades to keep the DWP substation from being near Marquez Elementary School, one of the reasons being the RF exposure that may be caused by this substation. And now you are talking about taking that same radio frequency radiation exposure and bringing it into the classroom knowingly, and doing it in a very industrial strength type way, and doing it in a very comprehensive way, and exposing the children in a very long-term way. A long-term way that if you look at the studies, on page 51 from Dr. Hardell, you will see has been well associated with cancer. And if you look at on page 55, you will see the brain tumor, information about the brain tumor registry. The wireless industry wants us to believe that cancer rates haven't increased. There are references to the brain tumor registry that shows brain tumors have increased about 20 to 40% in populations under age 50. They group them all together to try to minimize the effect. But the effect is real, and you need to look closely and protect our children. Thank you.